Hello and welcome to Rajya Sabha Television. You're watching India's World with me, Rausan, Pereira. India and the Maldives inked 4 pacts, including in the areas of cooperation in culture, agribusiness and information technology, and for easy facilitation of visas during Maldivian President Ibrahim Mohamed Solih's maiden visit to India. Welcoming the pact on facilitation of visa arrangements, Solih expressed satisfaction that this will facilitate many Maldivians who send their children to school in India to be able to accompany them. A joint statement said that the pact will also facilitate easier visa arrangements for Maldivian citizens and their families to come to India for medical treatment. Prime Minister Narendra Modi noted that the new agreement will address the common concerns and ensure that people-to-people contacts are enhanced. The Maldives is one of the very few countries with which India has a visa-free arrangement. The other agreements were on cultural cooperation, establishing mutual cooperation to improve the ecosystem for agro-business, and joint declaration of intent on cooperation in the field of information and communications technology and electronics. On this edition of India's World, we will analyze the bilateral relationship between India and the Maldives. Joining me on the program today are Gurjit Singh, former ambassador, St. Muni, foreign affairs expert, Smita Sharma, Deputy Editor of the Tribune. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of India's World. Professor, I'd like to begin the program with you. What were the key takeaways for you as far as President Solih's visit to India?
The key takeaway is restoration of the confidence, mutual confidence, which was badly shaken during Yamin regime. And probably reiteration that our common interest, which even Yamin had talked under India first, I mean rhetorically he used to say that, would be carried forward. And I think that's the main takeaway. Now it remains how these promises on both the sides would be carried out on the ground. Because I have a feeling that always, I mean the ambience is such that they had to reiterate this promise. But the real meat lies in how they are carried out.
Right. Ambassador, have both the countries been able to successfully recalibrate their ties after this visit?
I certainly think so. I think this is one of the recent successes of India's foreign policy. And I think our consistent commitment to democracy is actually a very strategic aim, because whenever we've had democracies in our neighborhood, particularly in recent times, we seem to benefit from them. For instance, when Yamin was there, I don't think we were quite certain of where to go. And then an election comes and you get a result which is actually favorable. And India first will now become really India first. But more than that, I think the fact that Maldives, the smallest of our neighbors and very close to us, there are some natural inclinations of communication, of connectivity, which are now addressed in this visit. For instance, visas, for instance, digital economy, the blue economy. These are all, signs of something close by and how you handle it. We nevertheless have to be aware that the time of maybe a generation ago have changed. And today, you do not have the run of South Asia as you earlier did. Therefore, we have to be far more agile and must have larger purse strings to be able to have the transactional success of a strategy that we are adopting. And I think this visit really, more than recalibrated, I think is set the stock up towards a very vibrant relationship.
And going forward, talking about the visas, I think we can see better people-to-people contact as well, something that, we saw less of in the previous regime. Ambassador?
Indeed, I would agree with that. And that is one of the things of proximity. Now, if you are so close and you don't have easy movement and connectivity, you have air links, but you don't have a good visa regime, then it negates it. So I think putting this visa regime in place, saying that these visas will facilitate, as you said, people coming for medical treatment, mothers able to accompany children going to school. These are the common things that people really want to come for. They want to come shopping for daughters' weddings, and then you wait for a visa. But now you don't have to do that. Similarly, for us also getting access for our business people and such. So I think this people-to-people contact and the fellowship of proximity, I think these have really been emphasized now.
Right. Yes, Professor, you wanted to add something?
No, I just wanted to add a point to visa issue. We must keep it in mind that visas were stopped by the Maldivians under Yamin. particularly of the technicians and other people who were working on Indian projects. As a result, most of the Indian projects got halted. And without facilitating this visa, so yes, I mean, at one level is people-to-people contact, which for business purposes, the Maldivians let the tourists come in, because without that, their economy would be in trouble. But the unspoken aspect is that it is restoring what Maldives had earlier, snapped in terms of visa ties.
Right. Smita, from a journalist point of view, what were the key takeaways really? What were the highlights for you?
Well, I think the most important highlight was the fact that the relationship reset button, because it was important. Though, just a slight difference from what Ambassador Gurjit Singh said. I think India cannot claim a sort of a sense of victory for the election results that happen in Maldives. That goes solely to the people of Maldives. Yes, the Indian foreign policy, I think on hindsight, definitely looked wiser that during the last few months of Yamin's rule, starting with that coup, that clampdown of emergency in February this year, India did not sort of take a very sharp, extreme position despite all these provocations coming in, including President Nasheed, who was also seeking some sort of a military intervention from India. So India chose to sit and watch, which I think played out wisely for India instead of investing all its eggs in one basket. But having said that, I think, on the visa issue also, look, the two countries have gone through in the last 3 years through a lot of turmoil. And while President Yamin, if you remember, when he actually came to India on one of his first visits, there were a lot of agreements that were signed with fanfare, and India had actually said that they would be doing a lot of projects in Maldives. But in the last few months, if you were to listen to the Maldivians on Yamin's establishment, many of them were complaining that, look, all these projects hadn't moved forward. So yes, Professor Muni is right when he says that the speed of delivery of projects, because now if you're talking about a $1.4 billion assistance to Maldives, which is going to go in for a lot of projects. There are some projects that will have to be pushed from the Indian side. There will be some projects that, of course, will need the sort of political directive and willpower by the Maldivian, in fact, the Solih government itself. They are keen that India should invest a lot of its money in the port projects. Other than that, of course, you have the entire the visa section, the humanity. In the last few months itself, there were some 2,000 Indian personnel, because Indians in Maldives, it's a tiny island nation, archipelago, and if you see there, most of the Indians are working as professionals. So be it management services, nursing, medical services. Around 2,000 Indian workers had been denied permits to work in hotels there. That was because of the tension that was playing over. But for the Maldivians also, who are now coming in for medical treatment, and in fact the Maldivians were complaining that India had stopped giving them multiple entry visas or were restricting their entry for civilians also the past few months. So things were happening on both the sides, but I think it was important, and at a time when the entire neighborhood has been going through a tumultuous process, there have been elections, changes and what's happening in Sri Lanka. So you cannot look at Maldives in isolation, but it definitely gives in a sense of calm at the moment, which is reflected in much of the wordings in the joint statement, which talks about taking care of each other's interests. Because when it comes to Indian Ocean security, where the Indian Navy, the India plays a very, very important role, from Qatar to Strait of Malacca and beyond, where the Chinese territorial waters start, it becomes important to have a stable government in Maldives.
Absolutely, and it's much needed calm really after the period of Yamin there in the Maldives. Professor, as far as this $1.4 billion aid is concerned, how is that going to help really, and where do you think it's going to be used? At the end of the day, we also need to ensure, like you mentioned in your opening statement itself, timely delivery of these projects.
That's right. Before that, I just want to add what Smita said on the victory of democracy and the role of the people in Maldives, which is unquestioned. There is absolutely no problem. But we need to keep in mind that the international community's support for the people to come out bravely and without fear, participate in democracy was very significant. Because the way Yamin regime started clamping down on people, there were a lot of scare, and even after he had won, India even issued a statement that democratic process should be gone through. Other members, US and UK, many of the opposition leaders were living around either in India or in Sri Lanka. So without that support, the democratic process would not have geared itself into delivering what it delivered. Now this $1.4 billion is concerned, I think it will be staggered and disbursed in various sectors. I mean, one sector would go to the India-aided projects, which is absolutely clear. But you would recall that when Prime Minister Modi visited Maldives, President-elect at that time had said that our economy is in a dire crisis, and almost 70%, he said 70% debt is vis-a-vis China, and we have to repay it, and we don't have any money. So a section of this assistance, I guess, would also go for budgetary support to Maldives, so that they can ease some money and continue with their debt payment. There may also be a component of what you call the currency swap, which is not for the first time taking place. India has done it earlier. Even with Yamin, we did it, because whenever we even have provided water to Maldives, not only financial support. So I think this is also a part of the package which is there, plus the projects which were held up, many of the projects, for various reasons, because most important being that Yamin did not want them to function in a way. So I think the money would go there. It is a huge amount, even from India's point of view. Not many other neighbors have been offered this kind of a package. So I think let us see that this works and encourages Maldives to really further consolidate the bilateral relationship.
Absolutely. You know, Ambassador, talking about the other countries, and the US has really welcomed the recalibration of ties between India and the Maldives. But what interest is the Maldives to the others, really? Because let's not forget, it's of strategic importance.
True. Now, you see, when we had the original idea of the Indian Ocean as a zone of peace, it was something countries like India wanted actually to keep the US out once the British had left from the Maldives. But now times have changed, and the great game is being played in a different way. And today, the southern Indian Ocean, which includes Sri Lanka, Maldives, Seychelles, and Mauritius, in prime examples, are very important strategically for us. What the United States, since they are not operating too much in this part of the Indian Ocean, and that is why they have renamed their command as the Indo-Pacific Command rather than just the Pacific Command, and the British, the Europeans, particularly the Germans and the French, they give, I think, primacy to the Indian point of view on Maldives. So India is the lead player. We were also the lead player in 1988 when we stalled the plot coup at that time. However, between 1988 and 2018, the difference is that there is the large northern neighbor who is now far more active in the ocean than ever before. So the great game has now changed. So today, the cost of keeping a friend is much higher. Whatever you may do for a neighbor or a friendly country in the past is good for a brief. But what you do today is extremely important for the future. So therefore, as Professor Muni rightly explained, this 1.4 billion is a generous amount. And I think it is going to be divided broadly into three streams, which is debt or budgetary support, and it's going to have a credit line to bring in Indian products at will in your choice using the currency swap, which basically means you can buy it in rupees and you don't have to hedge it in foreign exchange. And the third is we will restart or do new Indian projects. We have to see that the Maldives actually has a total revenue of about $1 billion. And their debt to China, according to the former President Nasheed, is about $3 billion. So there's a huge amount. Sometimes debt servicing can also be a strategic tool. And you can either defer the debt servicing or you say, let it start now. So I think this hedging that we are providing them, at least will see them through the first year of this government, where they will have enough hedge to service the debt and yet provide something happening. To my mind, this is not a closed 1.4 billion offer. It is something which will continue as and when required, depending on what happens. And those are, as I said, the costs, the transactional costs of modern diplomacy are those, and we need to bear them. Now, you also asked me about the role of others. I haven't seen too many others come up to contribute to this. But I think the European Union, for one, is certainly going to pitch up with development aid not maybe debt servicing, because they believe debt servicing basically goes to repay China.
Yeah.
So I think the development finance, to do projects, to do training, to help them on climate change. I think these are some of the things the Europeans have been looking at. But we can never forget what the others like China continue to do.
Absolutely.
China is going to continue.
We'll talk about China in our next segment, but before that, something else that has been happening, Smita, is that efforts are being made to bring the Maldives back into the Commonwealth fold. Now, how will that change anything on the ground, really?
Well, of course, when Maldives was shown the door out of, if you see, it's Maldives and Pakistan basically who were wanting to go out of the Commonwealth fold, and this back and forth thing happening. It's not just about the Commonwealth fold, but it's also about bringing Maldives into the Indian Ocean Rim Association, IRA. So increasing its international presence, because obviously, there are countries that have interest, as both the co-panelists have also mentioned, right from the statements that were being made out while Yamin was clamping down his authoritarian regime in this island nation. So from the United States, a lot of it is being driven by the fact that at the end of the day, there is China at the back of your mind. Because, Maldives, if you look at the Indian Ocean passage, the shipping lanes, there are some 100,000 ships that pass annually carrying oil, mineral, manufactured goods. India with its bases in Lakshadweep, in Andaman Nicobar Islands, so that's where it plays a very crucial role. And these waters are now increasingly linked. So Maldives' stability, and also from the point of view of terrorism or radicalization, which is an important issue on the island nation, but you've seen the issue of, either the return of fighters, foreign fighters from the ranks of Islamic State, or people getting radicalized itself. That's another area where India has been very, very worried and working closely with Maldives. So the whole idea is to try and if you see President Solih's statements when he came to India recently, and before that, his foreign minister Abdullah Shahid was in India, they are also trying to play it very safe. They are not trying to rub China off in a wrong way completely.
Yeah.
So they are saying that yes, we are relooking at the free trade agreement that was bulldozed through by the last government. But they're also saying that we are open for business, because they really do need a lot of business at this point in time, which would mean that bilaterally and multilaterally, more the opportunities, more, because it's other than tourism, they need to develop their economies in ways so that they are not completely, beholden to one country itself.
Right, absolutely. Professor, is there a fear really that the Maldives might go the Sri Lanka way? And more specifically, when I say Sri Lanka, Hambantota comes to mind.
Well, let me first comment on the US role and other role. I vaguely recall, and I think quite confidently, that during Nasheed's time, both US and UK were looking for a foothold in Maldives. And you would recall that Nasheed had British advisors. And now Solih is having American advisors, and hopefully will also have British advisors. Every country works on its own interest, and therefore I don't rule out the possibility of both US and UK probably together working out of some space in Maldives, which keeps them very active in Indian Ocean, which is so critical. Also looking at it from the Chinese point of view. Now, why it is that we are not uncomfortable now, which we were uncomfortable then? And my feeling is, and I may be totally wrong, that somewhere there is a feeling, both in India and elsewhere, that we on our own alone cannot cope with the Chinese assertiveness and pressure. And therefore, internationally, particularly in South Asia, two countries, especially Japan and US, have started openly collaborating with India, and India is collaborating with them, not only in Maldives, in Nepal, in Sri Lanka, anywhere else. And this is a new development, I would say, and I think Gurjit would correct me, in India's foreign policy. Earlier, we were very hesitant and shy on any third power really dabbling into our sensitive neighborhood. Now we probably don't have many options but to cooperate with others. And this is so the US role, I would say, will be watched very carefully in a very friendly manner. Similarly, other roles will be, now China is not a pushover. And you cannot wish Chinese away. It is true that Shahid and Maldives had talked about revisiting the FTA. But the Chinese also sent a special envoy to Solih, saying that the relation should be kept intact.
Yes.
And Chinese came out very strongly against Nasheed Swani's statement, in which he had said there is no transparency in the Chinese projects and all that. And Chinese literally snubbed him without naming him. So the Chinese would take it very strongly. And if you recall, since you mentioned Sri Lanka, in Sri Lanka, Chinese said, okay, if you want our companies to get out, pay the penalty for whatever they had worked. If they will ask the same from the Maldives, if at all Maldives says that you pack up and go. And Maldives is in no position really
Absolutely.
to compensate for that. You know, we are entering a world where, as I said, China cannot be wished away. China has its own interest. Now, all that we have to see, I think we should be happy because we have signed a trilateral Indian Ocean security arrangement between Sri Lanka and Maldives. And we should be happy to ensure that the Chinese infrastructure projects do not have a strategic dimension.
Absolutely.
Do not have a security dimension.
Right.
To that extent, if Maldives can assure us and implement it on the ground, we would be able to work with China also being present in whatever form possible.
Absolutely. Ambassador, your thoughts on the China angle?
Yes, I agree with Professor Muni. I think one, we are more comfortable with the United States and other Western countries today in the Indian Ocean. We see them as strategic partners. Japan is today an economic strategic partner. Earlier, for instance, we would never want them to come to Nepal or Sri Lanka, but today we are ready to do joint projects with them. But this is taking into account the reality of China, which through BRI is putting more and more available funds in which you can do almost anything that they want. So you need to counter that, and since you can't do it alone, you do it with partners. And the third aspect is that we do not mind development of infrastructure in our neighborhood by whosoever, but that infrastructure should not be used in a manner inimical to our security. So you can do a port, you can do an island, but who comes and goes to that island, particularly in a military sense, needs to be with our consent, and certainly we need to step up that part. How strongly we will do that, it remains to be seen. But I think that is the critical part. So if you say what's difference between Yamin and Solih, one, democratic. Second, playing the middle game in Solih's time. Yamin had gone too much to China's side. Today they're playing, and I do not think that the FTA will be scrapped. It may be reviewed. Yeah. I do not see the island development of that bridge going to be taken away. I don't see any projects coming to light. But I think instead of putting others' projects on hold, we should focus on getting our projects off the ground. That will make a much better statement.
Absolutely. And, you know, talking about China and talking about this recalibration, the reset button is what you said between India and Maldives. Should we be wary of what China is, you know, probably thinking about Maldives and what China can do as far as the Indian Ocean is concerned?
Well, I think India is concerned for sure, and genuinely justifiably concerned, you know, because at the end of the day, every country has to take care of its national interests. Even if you don't go hyper hammer and tongs about your concerns, but at the same time, you should not be a pacifist on issues. Look, if you turn back the clock to 2012, China didn't even have an embassy in Malé at that point in time, but GMR was thrown out of that airport project, which had led to a lot of souring of ties. And now you have a far visible increased Chinese presence.
Absolutely,
you know, it's not just Hamban Tota, which led to that huge economic issue for Sri Lanka, and it got leased out for 99 years to China. You have a Djibouti base in East Africa. You have the Gwadar port in Pakistan, and also China's increasingly economic presence in Myanmar, in Bangladesh, in Maldives, of course. New York Times, in fact, just this week has done an investigative report where they say that China's military strategic component in the China-Pak economic corridor is far more, because they've accessed some so-called documents that were not in the public domain so far. So India will definitely have to, and I absolutely agree with Ambassador Gurjit saying that you cannot stop others from doing their projects. What you can do is expedite your own projects, because, you know, like Abdullah Shahid, he said that we can't scrap off the infrastructure projects by China because they're already done and delivered, be it the airport project, a lot of which was also a consortium project. So India is also wanting to help Maldives in the other sectors, which they have been asked for help for, in the housing sector, in sewage, you know, that deal with people directly. So we will have to make sure that there is no maritime chokehold kind of a situation that India has to go through because of China increasing its base, but at the same time continue to deliver on its promises so that you are looked upon as a partner, as a neighbor that actually delivers and not just makes words and the words are translated into action as well.
Right. I've got time to take in one last comment of the program. Closing comment from you, Professor, on the challenges and the way forward as far as the bilateral relationship between India and the Maldives is concerned.
Well, I say well done so far. Walk the talk. Whatever has happened, whatever has been promised from either side must be carried out honestly, sincerely, and as fast and efficiently as possible.
All right. On that note, then, we'll call it a wrap on this edition of India's World. We'd like to hear from you as well. You can share your feedback with us. Our email ID is indiasworld.feedback@gmail.com. You can also tweet to us using our Twitter handles at FRP09 and at Rajya Sabha TV. That's it from me. See you again next time.